And our topics will include, but are not limited to, everyday issues. We're here for you, for our listeners. We want to know what's important to you.
So again, don't miss us
on Tan Talk Radio. Tune in again, Shrink and Wrap Show.
We'll see you then.
The Shrink and Wrap Show at its new time, Thursdays from 4 to 5 p.m. here on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Hi, I'm Dawn Reese with the Dawn Reese Show, most powerful names in entertainment, every Thursday at 5 p.m. I have so many different segments I'm so excited to share with you, from miracle stories to celebrity interviews with Hollywood connections to travel to local business, promoting your business on the air with me, an amazing opportunity to grow your business. Tune in to the Tan Talk Radio Network, 106.1 FM on Thursdays, 5 p.m. with me, Dawn Reese.
Hey everyone, it is Brandy Joy with the Brandy Joy Joyride. Feel free to hop in and have a good time with us every Thursday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. This show is brought to you by One Unit, dedicated to bringing people together, letting your voices be heard, and of course, we're here to entertain you, upbuild you, inspire you, and even hear from you. So every Thursday, tune in to 106.1 FM, Brandy Joy Joyride, and we will hear from you, and let's have some fun.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
You are about to enter the arena of real news and factual commentary on the Voice of Reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Now, here is your host for today's program, Kevin Carey.
Well, good morning. It's great to be back. I'm here with two of my favorite people, Gary Gibbons and Chris Griffin, who are fellow attorneys. And I think you have a title too, senior political analyst, Gary.
Yeah, just the oldest guy in the room, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't know I wasn't sure who the junior political analyst was. Well, gentlemen and friends, we have a lot to talk about in the next 2 hours. And I would put this under the category of when you think it couldn't get any worse. It does, to the point of just unbelievable. You know, Chris, we talked last week about how the abnormal sometimes may seem normal just because it happens so often. Mm-hmm. And we were here just 7 days ago, and the world has changed in what we've seen since then. And we said last week we've seen things we thought we had never seen before.
Exactly. Yeah, and I know we're going to get into it in more detail, but what's happened over the last 3 days with respect to this anti-weaponization fund is truly beyond the pale. Not to say that other things weren't, but.
Well, it is. And I do want to mention, as always, we're going to open up the phone lines for those of you who are listening or maybe even watching on, I don't know if YouTube is contemporary or not, Gary, but we do have viewers on YouTube and listeners on the radio, on WTAN. On 1340 AM and 106.1 FM. So thank you for listening and watching. But we are going to get right into, Chris, the topic you just mentioned, which I never thought we'd ever see was this concept of a slush fund of, some people said 1.7, but it's $1.8 billion. And there's a lot to talk about, and we've got some audios on that. I want to start out with Liz Oyer, who's one of our favorite commentators, who's the former pardon attorney at the Department of Justice. And Liz has some thoughts about this slush fund.
Hey, everybody. I have some news, and it's not good. The Justice Department's settlement with Donald Trump is even worse than we knew. It turns out there was a secret part of the agreement that was hidden from us when it was announced yesterday. I just reviewed it, and I am struggling to find words to tell you how catastrophic and corrupt it is. I'm Liz Oyer, the former pardon attorney for the Department of Justice. Here's the deal. Todd Blanche, in his official capacity as acting attorney general, signed this one-page document right here. It's called a release of claims. And here's what it does. It signs away all claims against Donald Trump on behalf of the United States. In other words, it says that Trump cannot be investigated, audited, or sued by the United States government in the future. That includes any government agency, the Justice Department, the IRS, etc. In effect, this will end the ongoing audits of Trump and his companies. But that's not all. It forfeits our right to collect any taxes owed by Trump and his businesses. It waives our right to try to reclaim the money he stole from taxpayers. It gives up our right to sue him for damages or to pursue really any legal recourse whatsoever against Donald Trump. And it binds the United States forever, meaning it applies even after Trump and Blanche leave office. And it's actually even worse than that because it's not limited to just Donald Trump. It also signs away all of our claims against his companies, his family members, and his associates. This is a staggering betrayal of the public trust. Even compared to other bad acts by this administration, this one stands out as especially unforgivably corrupt. Trump and Blanche are colluding together to give away our money, our rights, and our democracy. I'm sure there will be lawsuits that will argue that this agreement is illegal and unenforceable, and hopefully they will succeed. I'm not sure who will bring them or when, but I'll be keeping a close eye on it and I'll keep you informed. In the meantime, please help me sound the alarm. This is truly an emergency situation. Please share this with your friends and neighbors and make sure they understand how corrupt and unconscionable this is. Call your elected reps and demand that they take action, whatever you can think of to help defend our democracy. Thanks.
Yeah, I want to hear from both Gary, you and Chris, and we have the beauty of 2 hours. We can spend, I think, almost 30 minutes on this topic, if not more. But I want to give our viewers and listeners a background of this. This started from a lawsuit filed by Trump against the IRS, and had to do with, it's been a while, had to do with improper release of tax information. But let me make clear, this was done by someone who went to gone to prison, by the way, but he was hired in the Trump administration in 2017. So all these terrible things that Trump is suing the IRS for happened under his watch when he was president, and the IRS was under his watch. So that case never had any legs to it. There, I think, were 40,000 or so people. It wasn't just Trump. He was the only person, though, who sued. There was one other person who asked for an apology. In fact, his name was Griffin. His last name was Griffin.
No relation.
No relation to you, Chris. But these facts, as lawyers, facts do matter. We're not here just to rant. I hope we don't spend most of our time ranting. But those are the facts. So we had a president who was one of about 40,000 people, the only one who sued. He sued someone who basically was his employee under his IRS. He waited. He could have sued, by the way, during the Biden administration.
Which if I just
sure, absolutely.
There was a very valid argument that the lawsuit was barred by the statute of limitations.
That's a good point.
It had never reached that point in the course of the litigation, but there's a good chance it would have been thrown out on that basis alone.
So this lawsuit, which was frivolous, there's a hearing, right? And you've got this attorney general. Let me be clear: the interim acting attorney general, he's not been approved, and I frankly don't think he would be approved by the Senate Judiciary Committee. But who was Trump's personal lawyer? IRS, they're not pushing back at all, suggesting that Trump, this is a bad complaint. There's a hearing, though, where the federal judge makes very clear that there's a concern about this being an actual case or controversy, because you've got, it's like, hey, Gary, let me, let's scheme this where we can, put the slush fund together. So there's a clear situation where I think there's a perception the judge is going to dismiss this case. And in the context of that, just so, again, I don't think people understand all the facts. They dismiss the DOJ dismisses the case, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And they say, by the way, we're going to have this this commission, which is not in any way independent. There's no judge involved to settle to oversee the case or the settlement. And so there'll be five cronies selected by Todd Blanche, i.e., selected by Trump.
Right.
I don't even know, frankly, where this $1.8 billion is coming from. But it's just, again, Chris, we were saying last week that something boggles the mind. It just boggles my mind. So I'm going to stop talking, let you guys give me your comments.
Gary?
Well, yeah, I think it's important to go back and look at the fundamentals of the Constitution and what it requires in order to even bring a suit. And the judge, in her order of dismissal, talks about that. She says, quote, "Federal courts are courts of limited jurisdiction. We possess only the power authorized by the Constitution and statute. Thus, this court has an independent obligation to police the constitutional and statutory limits on its jurisdiction. One such constitutional mandate is set forth in Article 3, which limits federal courts to adjudicating cases or controversies. The existence of a case or controversy is a bedrock requirement of our jurisdiction, and we cannot exercise judicial power without it. Accordingly, before the court can rule on the plaintiff's motion, that it must first confirm whether the court has jurisdiction. A key characteristic of the case or controversy requirement is the existence of adverseness, or a dispute between parties who face each other in an adversary proceeding. There must be an honest and actual antagonistic assertion of rights by one individual against another, which is neither feigned nor collusive. Typically, adverseness is found in a situation where one party is asserting its right and the other party is resisting. Consequently, if there is no adverseness, there is no case or controversy. In the instant case, the defendants have not yet filed any notices of appearance. Nonetheless, the parties have advised the court that they are engaging in discussions to resolve this matter. Moreover, although President Trump avers that he is bringing this lawsuit in his personal capacity, he's the sitting president, and his named adversaries are entities whose decisions are the subject of his direction. Indeed, President Trump's own remarks about this matter acknowledge the unique dynamic of this litigation. Accordingly, it is unclear to this court whether the parties are sufficiently adverse to each other so as to satisfy Article 3's case or controversy requirement. So what she did was, she said, I want briefs from both of you to show me that this is a real case. And they were supposed to do that by the 20th. Well, guess what? 2 days before that, they enter into this ridiculous settlement. And it's not 1.8. It's 1,776,760 million. Sorry, it's so big I can't even remember what the number. 1776 is what the January 6th people were chanting when they stormed the Capitol. And that's what this is about. They've been talking about retribution and getting paid for this for years. And Trump's talked about it since 2024. So, I mean, what happened here is, you said it's beyond the pale. It pushed me over the edge. Because it is everything that we have been trained, as lawyers to uphold. And as I said, that's why I started with this. This is the bedrock of everything. You can't have a collusive lawsuit. You can't go in and try to scheme the system. The judges are there to protect the system, and they're there to make sure that the parties who are coming before them are doing the same thing. And this is anything but it. And when you have Todd Blanche, who is supposed to be, the number one law enforcement officer in the country, coming in and doing this kind of BS. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Well, and I want to, Chris, get your thoughts, but
Sure.
The other thing that to me is incredible about this, Gary, is the persons benefiting from this are convicted felons, often violent felons. There was a hearing yesterday where our buddy Blanche was before the Senate Judiciary Committee. He would not even acknowledge that there'd been exclusion for those who committed violence against the police officers on January 6th. He could not acknowledge that.
And were convicted
Absolutely.
Of committing violence.
I mean, so it's not even like we're talking about you're gaming the system, Gary. You're very much correct, but it's not as if you're gaming it to help some injured party.
Nope.
You're helping these violent convicted felons.
Yep.
When did this not become just a horror movie, Chris? I don't get it.
Well, it is a horror movie, and we've been living through it for quite a while now. But to Gary's point, this put me over the edge, if you will, as a lawyer, but more importantly, as a citizen. Let me make there are so many layers to this thing. The audio that we played touched on this. The hidden part of the agreement that was released the next day was that in addition to creating this fund against which people could make claims, well, look at this.
Yeah, by the way,
there can be no actions against Trump or his children based on tax audits, which has nothing to do with the underlying dispute that was supposedly settled. And I note that the general counsel of the IRS resigned immediately after this. And I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but to your point, where's the money come from? There's this thing called the Judgment Fund. It's been around for over half a century, and it's in place for funds to be drawn for legitimate settlements of disputes against branches of the federal government. And look, 1776, all of us know that when you create a settlement, you're trying to tie the amount to the damage suffered by the persons who are being compensated. 1776, as we noted, has to do with the birth of the country, has nothing to do with what these supposed claimants suffered as a matter of damages. That's just one point.
Well, and you're right. There's no connection between this lawsuit, which was tied to improper release of IRS tax returns, to these victims of the DOJ weaponization by the Biden administration. But
noteworthy, a person who has been the victim of weaponization by this administration are not eligible to make a claim against the fund.
Well, I was going to ask you that. I mean, could someone now say, James Comey say, I'm being improperly?
He said yesterday he might do it, just to show how ridiculous this whole thing is, and how if other people are entitled to victimization awards, then he certainly is.
This is such a big deal. I don't have any problem spending even more than the 30 minutes and going well beyond, even most of the first hour. In fact, I do want to, because of this issue being so important, we've got 3 audios. Ari Melber also talked about this, and so I'd like to hear from him.
Do you know, Mr.
We are following a huge corruption scandal today. It's one that first broke with ABC News journalists reporting that the president of the United States wants to seize over $1 billion in your tax money and give it to convicts, to people who attacked police, to people who have been convicted of violent crimes potentially, or other partisan crimes. We have never seen anything like this in our nation's history. And if you're watching and saying, oh, there's the news again telling me we're in unprecedented times. Well, yes, we are. The nature of the Watergate crimes, which ultimately expelled Nixon from office, changed our entire approach to political corruption, passed the campaign finance regime, those involved, compared to this, small sums of money and relatively minor, largely non-violent political, quote, dirty tricks, they called them then. Here, we're talking about funding the people who battered police, tried to assassinate public officials, including Republicans. They openly admitted to it, and were convicted of, in some cases, sedition against the United States. Now I'll show you that headline, over $1 billion for what they call a fund to those people. Now, this comes after a ploy. And I say that because, as we reported on this last week, these two things are not very related. But this is a classic Trump trick. And I will always level with you about what we're witnessing. Donald Trump filed a lawsuit that was so weak and shaky that the judge said there may not even be the real type of controversy required to have a lawsuit. And under that pressure, he now says he's pulling it, but that's the pretext for now taking taxpayer money. The New York Times reports Trump is trying to free his hand to reach a deal without oversight. Again, moving this out of the courts. Potential recipients include the people who did the insurrection that was so heinous at the time that, remember, Donald Trump was not only impeached for it, but then Trump, first-term Trump, didn't pardon those people at the time when he technically had the power. In fact, he said in public at the time that the violence was bad, and it was. Now we're being lied to and gaslit, and now he wants to not only reward the people he freed, but fund them in case he might try to do this again.
Yeah. So, Gary, Chris, comments?
Well, he said it quite well. And covered some of the points that we've already discussed. Let me touch on a few points because the three of us dig deeply into these things, and other folks probably don't have the time that we have to do that. But I think people assume that if this is a government operation of some sort, there will be records, there will be disclosure, all of the things that we expect of government processes. No, in this instance. First, Todd Blanche will be appointing the 5 commissioners. The process for appointment and the persons who are appointed, secret, not to be disclosed. President Trump has the authority to remove any commissioner he wants to, so you can foresee that scenario. One of the commissioners doesn't do what he wants the commission to do, he kicks him off the commission. So there's no transparency on that. There's also absolutely no transparency, and this is so egregious, no transparency into the persons who apply or the persons who are paid. So we are going to have, now they will tell you, it says that there will be quarterly reports to the Department of Justice. Guess what that's going to be? Nothing. And we have no power, citizens, to force the revelation of that information. And the fact that that is so secret should tell everyone who's looking at this what the true motive is. And people will say, well, it's not just for the January 6th people. Well, it may not be, but it can benefit them if they apply and if the commission gives them the money that they want to. So the process associated with this ridiculous deal is so shady and so secret that we're going to say this a lot today, totally beyond the pale.
Yeah, and Gary, I want to get your thoughts. I did notice there was a lawsuit filed yesterday by 2 of the police officers who were injured on January 6th.
Yeah.
So there's been pushback, and also politically, because we do talk a lot about politics and law on this radio show. The Republicans are not. Again, it's an election year. I don't think Trump cares about it that much, but this cannot be helping the Republicans politically. This is not going to be a popular exercise. I can't imagine.
Well, the thing that this so-called settlement is based upon is a false premise. It's a lie. We always thought the big lie was that the election was stolen. The big lie is that there was weaponization against these January 6th defendants. We all saw it on TV. We saw the crimes being committed live on TV. And then they were all convicted or pled guilty. And none of those cases, none of them, there were 15. I'm looking at the records from the Department of Justice, okay? They say approximately. This is their wording. Approximately 1,583 have been federally charged with crimes associated with the attack of the U.S. Capitol. Approximately 608 have been charged with assaulting, resisting, or impeding law enforcement agents or officers, or obstructing those officers during a civil disorder. Both of these crimes are felony offenses that involve obstructive acts directed at police. Approximately 180 have been charged with using or carrying dangerous weapons in the Capitol, on the grounds, or around the Capitol. 153 have been charged with destruction of federal property. These, and yet they say that these prosecutions were weaponized against these people. No, stop saying that this was weaponization. It's just not true. And the fact that none of these cases have been overturned on appeal, they're batting 1,000 in these cases. Every one of they were either convicted by a judge or juries. You know how hard it is to get 12 people to agree on anything in a jury? They did it hundreds of times.
Now this is offensive.
Yeah,
this is just beyond offensive.
And it is the big lie. And I'm sick of it. That's what really pushed me over the edge this week, was the fact that none of this is the weaponization that's happened has been in this administration.
Right.
With the cases, they're identifying a defendant and then trying to figure out what the hell the crime was that they can charge him with.
Well, you're right. In fact, you mentioned that point last week,
right,
Chris, and we talked about last week too, Chris, about the bigger issues about our children and grandchildren. We can't make this we can't normalize this. We can't do it. And by the way, one of the persons pardoned, and you may have heard or read about this, was then convicted of a child abuse, and he told that he wanted to pay the child off,
2 children,
by saying
12.
there'll be money coming my way. And that came up, I think, maybe in the hearing with Blanche, or it came up in some context this week, and saying, "Oh no, they didn't know about this," but they knew,
of course they did,
money was coming. And this criminal who had been pardoned, wrongfully. I mean, I still think that's one of the most horrible acts the president's ever done. His first day in office was to pardon these violent criminals who tried to take down this democracy. But this person who was a convicted felon and is now a felon for child abuse, saying, I can pay you off if you just keep your mouth shut because money's coming my way.
Right.
I mean, when does this not just become a nightmare after nightmare, Chris?
Well, it has become
a
nightmare after nightmare. But I think the point of your question is, when is the veil lifted for the majority of American citizens to understand the points that we've made already today and to be as outraged as we are about those things? And that's, I think it is so bothersome to all of us that there doesn't appear to be, no, there isn't any type of groundswell of public outrage about, first, the pardons, second, the establishment of this fund. And that's why I share Gary's outrage. It just put me over the edge. Let me make a point, and we may get too deeply into the legal weeds, but I think it's important. I think the normal reaction of a citizen, is to say, well, we've got to stop this. We need to file a lawsuit to stop it. I consulted my law professor son, who teaches civil procedure, among other things, at the University of Arizona Law School, because along with the case and controversy requirement, a plaintiff in a federal lawsuit has to have what we call standing. And those standing requirements, as established by the United States Supreme Court, prevent what we would call taxpayer lawsuits. That something happens, some act is taken by the federal government, I am aggrieved because you're using my tax dollars improperly. I can't sue on that. I have to have what I think the court calls a specific and specialized injury that is separate and apart from what all citizens suffer. And I was happy to see, at least as a symbolic effort, that I think we mentioned it, that the two of the officers filed a lawsuit yesterday. More power to them. But I don't want people to be surprised if that lawsuit is dismissed, because now they might have a good claim because they do have a special injury, not directly because of the fund, but, and this is their allegation, but because you are rewarding people who attacked and assaulted me and our colleagues. So it'll be very interesting to see what judge gets it and what that judge does with this lawsuit, because it's going to be very difficult to overcome existing principles of standing to maintain that lawsuit. AM radio became kind of over the last 20, 30 years, this ranting. We're lawyers. I used to be a circuit judge. We're saying things that are we don't say every day. If you heard this, you might think this is common. It's not, but we have an obligation, and we talked about this last week, Chris, to speak out. And I know, Gary, you and I respect your opinion. I can see the anger you have, and I share with you and Chris. But this is so wrong. And we talked about last week, Chris, about we can't let our children and grandchildren think this is how you behave. These are like mobsters. Yep.
Yeah.
These clowns in the White House just saying, how far can we go and just get away with this, which is clearly illegal. But again, I think the challenge is going to be these Republicans who are looking at polls, and we're going to have a poll watch a little later in the show, are not looking good. This is not helping the politicians who need to get reelected in November.
And we did hear the Senate Majority Leader John Thune, when he was asked about it, and it's ridiculous to say that I'm proud that he said what he said, which is we have a lot of questions to be answered. Come on, man. We already know what the answers are. You need, as an elected representative of your people, you need to take action immediately to stop it. You don't need to ask any questions. There are no questions that have not been answered. But and we talk about this a lot. I simply don't know how these people, so many of whom are lawyers, but who understand our constitutional system of government. They understand, they see it in real time, how that system is being violated, is being trampled, and they won't do anything about it. What is stopping these people from standing up and exercising their authority?
Well, with Thune too, it's interesting. We're going to take a break here in a second, but he also, we've talked many times about the Texas Senate race between Cornyn and Paxton, and Trump has endorsed Paxton, and Thune came out verbally saying not very happy with that. So there is a little bit of a pushback on that. But we're going to talk a little bit more about this. You're listening to the Voice of Reason on the Tan Talk Radio Network with me. I'm Kevin Carey with my good friends and co-host Chris Griffin and Gary Gibbons, and we'll take time out for a short break. And when we return, we'll talk more about this issue and also about some other interesting issues about the opportunities to maybe get outside the electoral college problems we're having, as well as looking at the further grift and stock trading, which we're going to hear from Rachel Maddow, who's going to talk about both the slush fund and the stock trading, which Trump seems to like to gain money illegally. There's a concept of insider information that he doesn't seem to quite understand. So we're going to take our first break.
Are you a writer, inventor? Do you have questions about your intellectual property rights? Well, tune in every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 11 o'clock for Joy on Paper. Once a month, I will have a special guest, the writer's legal eagle, Bill Larson of Larson & Larson, who can answer your questions. Protect your valuable work. Email me your questions to patsy.radio@gmail.com and then listen in every Tuesday and Thursday at 11 a.m. right here on Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network. That's patsy.radio@gmail.com.
You're listening to the Voice of Reason on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Tune in to the Shrink and Wrap Show here on Tan Talk Radio.
Our stories and our topics will include, but are not limited to, everyday issues. We're here for you, for our listeners. We want to know what's important to you.
So again, don't miss us
on Tan Talk Radio. Tune in again, Shrink and Wrap Show.
We'll see you then.
The Shrink and Wrap Show at its new time, Thursdays from 4 to 5 p.m. here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. And now it's time for the Only a Conservative Could Think It Minute with your host, Ed Golly.
Conservative farmers sure are crying a lot these days. They're crying about how the Chinese have stopped buying their grains. They're whining because their fruits and vegetables are rotting in the fields because their immigrant workers have fled the prospect of being detained and abused in a concentration camp. With the price of diesel fuel and fertilizer climbing precipitously, many of these farmers are now facing bankruptcy. Yet, remember how these same farmers railed against the immigrant labor that harvested their crops under the hot sun all day for slave wages? Remember how they characterized those immigrants as poisoning the blood of the nation and claimed those immigrants were destroying property value, raping women and children, forming gangs, committing murders, bringing with them every form of violent crime, drugs, and disease? They claimed those immigrants were just freeloaders, living off the public dole, exploiting free housing, free health care, and free public education. Only a conservative would think that electing white supremacists who hate and oppress all people of color would somehow make America great again. Think about that.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
We are back. This is Kevin Carey with my good friends and fellow attorneys, Gary Gibbons and Chris Griffin. And we're going to spend a little more time talking about this slush fund, just corrupt conduct that's occurred just over the last few days and has been examined, was examined in detail with the Senate Judiciary Committee with our good buddy at Interim Attorney General Todd Blanche, which I thought he gave very poor answers when he would not even acknowledge to any of the senators that they would exclude from this slush fund any convicted violent criminals or felons who had attacked a police officer, which to me, that's like we acknowledge today's Thursday. It's just any key, with Trump, you cannot, and we'll talk later about what he did when he's primaried some of these people who are now not going to be in office because they're not Trumping enough, but you cannot go an iota outside of that. And you just look
can't
foolish.
color outside the lines at all.
Good way to put it, Chris. But Blanche is there. And frankly, that he was the personal attorney itself doesn't offend me as much as the fact, but he's still acting as if he's the personal attorney. He made the point, which I tend to agree with, that the fact that fact in itself, but the problem is he's acting like he still is, just like
that he still is Trump's personal attorney.
Right.
Because he is. Because under the ethics rules, once you have a client, you have a duty of loyalty to them forever.
And you cannot participate in an adverse action against them. Which is what he's purportedly doing.
That's why he's going to have some bar issues, by the way, just like our friend from Tampa, I think, is the former attorney general is. Trump, and again, I keep Michael Cohen, I keep thinking back the day when he testified as he was heading off to his. It was interesting. It was a kosher. It wasn't just a federal prison. It was one that it was for attorneys and accountants, and they had great kosher food. Seriously, where he went in New York, but he made the point. Don't touch Trump. I'm telling you, people, everything he touches dies. And, there's such a, I guess, a need for power that people don't understand that. And that's what's happening now. But I do want to,
if I may, and this is a bit of a digression, but it has its point, I think. You mentioned that Blanche most likely will have bar issues. Every lawyer in the United States is a member of the bar of their state. Most of those bars are regulated by the Supreme Court in that state, as they are here. And when a lawyer acts contrary to our canons of ethics, then the bar and ultimately the Supreme Court can discipline them for doing that. The DC bar is investigating, I don't remember his first name, his last name is Clark, for the outrageous lies that he asserted on behalf of Trump regarding the so-called stolen election in 2020. The bar has begun a disciplinary proceeding against him for saying demonstrably false things. The Trump administration has now filed a lawsuit in DC, the premise of which is no state bar has any jurisdiction over any lawyer acting in the Department of Justice or acting on behalf of the administration. Now think about that. This code has so many important limitations on what we can do as lawyers, rightly so. Lying is one of the things and this was only the beginning. The bar hasn't disciplined him. He would have an appeal available to him to higher authorities if he were disciplined. But this administration is saying, as a matter of law, black and white, if you are doing things for us or for any other administration, no matter how egregious they are, you cannot be disciplined.
Yeah, and Pam Bondi was even saying that months ago. I don't think they had formally done it, but they said we don't want the bar associations, the state bar, and then Gary knows this as well. I mean, the state bar has exclusive jurisdiction, and when in Florida at least, that includes the Florida Supreme Court has the jurisdiction, through the bar complaint process, but it's not something that the DOJ or the federal government deals with. It's a state bar, state issue as to ethics, because the ethics codes may vary and do vary from state to state. So I don't know, Gary, if you have any thoughts on that topic.
Well, yeah, we've all been involved in settlement agreements, right? Where litigation is going on and the parties agree to settle, and you do mediations, and
when I do my job well, we have settlements,
right? So there's a written settlement agreement, and if there is a court case involved, usually the court will approve the settlement and order the parties to abide by the terms of it, and then retain jurisdiction to enforce it if they don't. Okay. In this case, what the judge was doing was saying, I'm not even sure I have a case here because I don't think I have jurisdiction yet. I need you to show me that I do. And then, wait a minute. The parties are telling me that they want to dismiss the suit ahead of time before I can actually tell them that there was no case here. And now they want to come up with this crazy, settlement. I don't know what it is. I'm not involved in it. And so when you read it, it looks like nothing we've ever seen before.
No.
Because no judge would ever approve this. Here's what it says. Once the funds are deposited into the designated account, the United States has no liability whatsoever for the protection or safeguarding of those funds, regardless of bank failure, fraudulent transfers, or any other fraud or misuse of the funds. This is literally like a mob boss took over our government, and we don't have any rules anymore. And I mean, Todd Blanche gets to appoint 5 people to a commission that are going to dole out the money. Don Jr., Ivanka, Eric, Jared, Steve Witkoff. They're 5. Yeah, I think that Trump wouldn't remove any of those.
I never thought of that lineup, but you're right. And we would never know.
Well, Blanche
would never know what they did or who they gave it to, including themselves.
When Blanche would not admit, that sky was blue or today was Thursday, and he was talking about this independent commission as if it was independent in any way, which is a joke, and maybe somehow governed by some court system, which, as you say, Gary, it's not. I mean, there's no connection at all between this frivolous lawsuit and this settlement. There's nothing between the two. And as you said, the court rightly said there's not even a case or controversy here because it's all on one side of the table. I mean, the whole thing is corrupt. And this is corruption that just keeps getting worse and worse. And we don't say that lightly. We're lawyers and judges, but you can't watch this and not at least cry to the heavens and say somewhere this needs to stop. I don't know what, Chris, you wanted to add.
I did. We talked about this last week, and I want to make the point again. And I'm probably got my Shakespeare incorrect, but we've got to be more than just King Lear yelling into the storm.
Right.
And so I could imagine folks listening to us today and I got to turn this off because I can't listen to it anymore because it's awful, it's terrible, it's inexcusable, and I have no power to do anything about it. Well, that's not right. You do have power, and that power is hanging together. I have no better term for it. We talked last week about we have these discussions on the air so that people know that they are not alone in their opposition to what's happening through this administration. And I urge everyone, please don't give up. Don't be overcome with despair. How this gets fixed is by we as the citizenry ultimately taking back charge of our government. So again, I was thinking about that when I went to get a cup of water, and I urge people, don't be so frustrated by this that you just throw up your arms and give up. We cannot do that.
No, and you're right. I mean, I think, we were all, I think, students of history and law. And I don't think, at least my opinion is, there's never been in the history of this now 250-year history of our country, this experiment of democracy, which is the longest standing democracy in the history, is so fragile and is being pushed. But I think there has to be some optimism. I wanted not to kick this too long, but this is a big deal. So I want to hear our listeners listen to Rachel Maddow about the slush fund, but also tied into the stock trading issue, which is, again, the theme here to me is just ongoing corruption with this administration. So I want to hear from Rachel Maddow for a few minutes.
Well, the reviews are in, and they're pretty much unanimous. I mean, quote, one of the single most corrupt acts in American history. Quote, corruption unparalleled in American history. Quote, the most brazen theft and abuse of taxpayer dollars by any president in American history. Quote, the largest single act of grand larceny in American history. 5 stars. Most corrupt thing ever. People are grasping for words to adequately describe the unprecedented nature and magnitude of what President Donald Trump is attempting to do right now. And this isn't even about the whole stocks fiasco we just talked about a couple minutes ago, which has also been revealed over the last few days, in which the president appears to have been buying stocks in companies right before he actively took steps as president to boost those companies. Multiple times, millions of dollars. I mean that might be the biggest presidential corruption scandal in American history, were it not for this other thing breaking at the same time about the same U.S. president. This $1.8 billion taxpayer dollars, $1.8 billion in taxpayer funds that Donald Trump is liberating from the U.S. Treasury to pay out to his friends and allies. And look, I know there's a lot of coverage today that has described this fund. First of all, they're describing it as $1.7 billion. That's $1.8 billion. But you're also seeing a lot of descriptions, a lot of headlines about this thing, describing this fund as some kind of settlement of Trump's ridiculous lawsuit against the IRS. With all due respect to my friends in the beleaguered mainstream U.S. media, I got to say that coverage and those headlines need to be refreshed. Because while Trump might have, talked about his grievance against the IRS as a pretext to explain what he wanted to do here, the way this has worked out, it's basically totally unrelated. This pot of money, this $1.8 billion, is not actually meaningfully connected to Trump's supposed grievance against the IRS. His lawsuit against the IRS is gone. Trump dropped it. So this $1.8 billion, this is not like a settlement that's being overseen by a judge or something. It is just something that Donald Trump told the government he controls to give him. And so now the government he controls is going to put almost $2 billion into a fund for him at the Justice Department, and Trump's attorney general will control the money. There is no judge involved. Neither the courts nor Congress is approving any settlement or overseeing any part of this. This is just Trump getting a ton of taxpayer money to dole out. Maryland Congressman Jamie Raskin today called it, quote, nothing but a racket designed to take taxpayer dollars out of the Treasury and pour it into a huge slush fund for Trump at DOJ to hand out to his private militia of insurrectionists, rioters, and white supremacists, including those who brutally beat police officers.
We're being very clear. I mean, I don't think we're mincing our words, and pretty much every point she made we've talked about. Yep. But I think reiteration of this point is important, is why I thought it'd be important to run that. But Gary, did you want to add anything?
Well, because things come so fast and furious from this administration, that a lot of people miss what's going on, because there's just too much. And
exactly.
I have so many friends that say, I can't even watch the news anymore. I just turn it off. Well, that's one of the reasons why we bring this stuff up, because people don't listen. And once you actually know what they're doing, it's shocking. He made 3,700 trades of stock, him or his people that are controlling his stock purchases, in a month. It's 40 a day. He's the president. Yeah. He's supposed to be getting us out of this war that he started. He's supposed to be doing a lot of other things, not supposed to be trading on his decisions that affect the markets. It's stunning that this is going on, and nobody seems to care or do anything about it. So we're going to have to fix a lot of things and there has to be accountability. That the Supreme Court did us no favors by giving a guy with criminal convictions and criminal proclivities in his personality unlimited liability. He can't be held responsible for anything he does during the rest of his term.
Total immunity. Yeah.
It's crazy.
It just when you thought it was corrupt enough, there came that chapter 2 about the you can't sue any of Trump or his companies for any of this.
Well, you can't audit their tax returns. That has nothing to do with the underlying lawsuit. And let me make another point. I keep thinking about, and Gary just touched on this. I think about conversations, coffee shops, dinners, family gatherings. And one of the things that will be said, because Todd Blanche said it yesterday, and it was an outright lie, no surprise, that this is not unusual. This has been done before. And the example that is raised is that during the Obama administration, and again, this judgment fund mechanism has been around forever. There were claims by Native Americans about the confiscation of farmlands over decades, if not centuries. It was a legitimate claim. And it was settled by use of this judgment fund. And I think the total amount was $720 million. Not that that's nothing, but it's not $1.8 billion. But it was transparent. The claims process was transparent. And most importantly, it had a direct relation to the claim being made that the U.S. government unlawfully confiscated the property of myself and my forebears. Again, getting a little bit into the weeds, but these conversations are going to take place. And we collectively need to push back when people engage in those conversations with us, say these things because they've heard Todd Blanche say it. It's a lie, and it needs to be called a lie.
Well, and there, Maddow was mentioning 2 issues. One, the slush fund, which I by the way, there are commentators that I listen to who have gone out of their way to be somewhat neutral and not as critical of Trump as we have been, who this has been a bridge too far for them. I've heard a number of people who in the past have been hesitant, not Trumpers, but have been somewhat hesitant, more so than I think we are. And I think we rightly heavily criticized Trump, who's a criminal, convicted criminal, and is corrupt. His entire administration is corrupt, period. Corrupt. I'll say it again. But this has had an effect on them. But this Maddow, she went on, and our listeners and viewers can go to the internet or YouTube. She plays specific discussions by Trump with specific stocks. So she doesn't make this allegation generally. You can go to that or just go to the internet and you can read and hear about the specific stocks that he then affected. It's insider trading. Now, insider trading is a complex issue, but I think it's fairly easy for people to understand the concept, and I think it applies to Congress as well, that you should not be making money based on information that you have that is not otherwise available to the general public. It's a very basic concept. And that's exactly what's happening here.
And when you do that many trades, it's because you're trying to take advantage of the movement in the market that you created.
That you're going to manipulate.
Yeah, you manipulated it, and now you're going to do that. So it's stunning. It really is.
There were 3 reasons why Trump sought the White House. 3, and nothing else I will ever believe. One is to avoid prison, because he was convicted of 32 felonies, and he had some very serious allegations of pending, as you know, with Georgia and the federal cases in Washington and also in South Florida. So he'd be in prison right now, but for this. Secondarily, he's on this retribution tour that, he's going to right this wrong, and anyone who challenges him, and he's been on it. He's to the point of these crazy slush funds, to the point of indicting people that should not be indicted. And thirdly, this corruption. I'm going to make as much money as I can from the federal government, and F you if you want to try and stop me. I'm going to put these toadies in at the Department of Justice who are my personal lawyers, so I can do whatever the F I want to do, and F you, period.
And not only Donald Trump himself, but his 2 sons.
Absolutely.
I mean, I was reading an article yesterday about the drone contract that the company of which Donald Jr. is a principal, getting a huge drone contract from the Department of Defense. Just let's sit back and imagine if one of President Obama's daughters they weren't old enough at the time, but let's say they had done anything close to that, the outrage would have been palpable.
Well, you're exactly right, Chris. We're going to take a short break for national and international news from CBS, and when we return for the second hour of The Voice of Reason, we're going to talk about these recent elections, as well as some issues about the popular vote versus electoral college. I'm Kevin Carey with my good friends and attorneys, Chris Griffin and Gary Gibbons. Please stay with us on the Tan Talk Radio Network, and we'll return shortly with more of the issues the conservatives never want you to hear about.
WTAN, Clearwater.
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade City.
FM 102.3.
Listen.
This is CBS News on the Hour, your home for original reporting.
I'm Deborah Rodriguez. Passengers like this woman from Michigan say she and others were left in the dark when their flight from Paris to Detroit made an unscheduled stop in Canada last night.
No one told us what was actually happening, just that U.S. authorities were diverting us to Montreal.
Air France says the plane was denied entry into the U.S. because one passenger was from an Ebola outbreak zone. CBS's Usher Qureshi is at the airport in Detroit.
U.S. Customs and Border Protection says Air France allowed a passenger from the Democratic Republic of Congo to board in error, violating new entry restrictions designed to keep a deadly strain of Ebola from entering the U.S. It's unclear when the person was last in the Congo or if they were showing any symptoms.
The flight flew on to Detroit after that passenger was escorted off the plane in Montreal. Pakistan's army chief has been scheduled to arrive in Iran today as Tehran examines a new U.S. peace proposal. CBS's Aaron Navarro.
The Pakistani military official that is meeting with them is supposed to be carrying a new message from the United States. One sticking point between both sides heading into today was the extraction of Iran's processed uranium and potentially sending that to a third-party country.
Yesterday, President Trump warned negotiations with Iran were on the borderline. Wildfire season is off to an early start in Southern California. More than 26,000 acres have burned this week, forcing tens of thousands of evacuations. Correspondent Matt Gutman is in Simi Valley.
A series of relentless wildfires fueled by powerful winds and dry conditions are menacing communities across Southern California. 10 active wildfires have torched tens of thousands of acres, sending families fleeing. With over 1,000 firefighters activated across the state, crews are tired and resources stretched.
Money's tight. Drivers are lining up for cheaper gas and food at Walmart. The company is reporting solid sales growth and profits in the first quarter. Business analyst Jill Schlesinger.
What this tells us is that consumers are still spending, but they're a little bit pickier. According to Walmart, they saw sales grow for grocery and general merchandise. That would include clothing and home goods.
High gas and airline prices keeping you home this holiday weekend. A tip from Julian Keel of flight search engine PointsPath.
If you really want to get the most bang for your buck, look at Europe, look at places like that. And also, look at late summer travel. That's a good choice as well.
Americans are expected to break another travel record this Memorial Day break. The average price for a gallon of regular gas today, $4.56. This is CBS News.
Join Adriana Diaz and Kelly O'Grady for the perfect start to your weekend. Ease into your Saturday with CBS Saturday Morning on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
This is Downtown Dave. How would you like to be able to promote yourself, your business, or someone else's business for less than the cost of one 60-second commercial on many Tampa Bay radio stations? Here's the deal. You can have your own 1-hour radio program on the Tan Talk Network for less than the cost of one 60-second announcement on many Tampa Bay stations. Your program will be on 2 Tampa Bay radio stations and will cover 4 million people in Florida, plus worldwide on the internet in both audio and video. And you'll have a web link for your business on the the Tan Talk 1340 website. We provide the producer, the state-of-the-art equipment, free production of commercials, and much more. Check it out today. Call Lola O'Brien, the Irish Hawaiian, at 727-510-7622. That's 510-7622. Call Lola O'Brien now, 727-510-7622. Call now and your 1-hour radio program can start tomorrow. Call 510-7622 for Lola O'Brien, the Irish Hawaiian, at the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Tune in Fridays at 11 a.m. for the Brand Builders Radio Show, brought to you by Professional Systems Printing and Promotions. They'll talk about everything from printing your business cards to brochures and banners. Hey, they'll put your name and logo on just about anything. So let's build something together. That's the Brand Builders Radio Show, Fridays from 11 a.m. till noon, here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Do you have questions after being injured in a car accident or injured because of someone's negligence? Do you feel overwhelmed or uncertain about the next steps after being injured in a crash? The personal injury attorneys at Peronic, Caulfield, Averill, and Noyes have been helping their injured clients since 1955 and are now on this radio station to provide guidance to you. Listen to FLA Law each Tuesday from 5 to 6 p.m. Let their decades of experience help you and your family. Offices in Clearwater, non-attorney spokesman.
Hi, I'm Dawn Reese with the Dawn Reese Show, most powerful names in entertainment, every Thursday at 5 p.m. I have so many different segments I'm so excited to share with you, from miracle stories to celebrity interviews with Hollywood connections to travel to local business, promoting your business on the air with me, an amazing opportunity to grow your business. Tune in to the Tan Talk Radio Network, 106.1 FM on Thursdays, 5 p.m. with me, Dawn Reese.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
You are about to enter the arena of real news and factual commentary on the voice of reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Now, here is your host for today's program, Kevin Carey.
And we are back for our second hour with, again, my good friends and fellow attorneys, Gary Gibbons and Chris Griffin. I remind our listeners that we will have open phone lines from 10:35 to 10:45 at 727-441-3000. We've been fairly clear and consistent, I think, in our view of what's happening right now. And feel free to chime in and feel free to, if you disagree with anything we've said, this is I believe we're still a free country. I'm not sure Trump would want that to be the case, but we still have First Amendment rights. So if you want to come in and chime in, we do want to give you that opportunity. But we're going to move on to poll watch now. I do think, and I agree with Gary and Chris, I think you've both alluded a little bit to the fact that so much of this is coming fast and furious that the average person, it's maybe hard to pick up on all of this. But the polls are reflecting the fact there is a very negative reaction to what's happening with Trump. So I want to hear from some of the polls right now.
Guys, Sarah Long will hear from the Bulwark. The New York Times Siena poll, which is an A+ rated poll, just dropped today, and it's got some terrible numbers from Donald Trump. And I want to walk you through them because there's a whole bunch of things in here that are notable. First of all, overall approval rating. It's hit a second term low at 37%. If you know me, you know I'm obsessed with getting Trump to 32%. Why? I call it the Bush line. George W. Bush, he left office at 32%. That's when the Republican Party went sent into the wilderness, and it came back with Donald Trump, and the party completely changed. So if you want the Republican Party to ever get back to anything that looks like the non-corrupt, non-toxic thing that it is right now, you want Donald Trump to leave office well below the Bush line. We want him in the low 30s. 37%, not terrible, not low enough. He's minus 15% on immigration, also one of his best issues. At cost of living, he is at minus 42%, which is the worst number he has ever recorded on this. On the Iran war, he's at minus 34%. 69% of independents think Trump is doing a garbage job. 47% of those independents say his policies have personally hurt them, which is up from 41% last fall. So people are increasingly feeling those gas prices, those grocery prices, and they're saying, this is negatively impacting me and I'm mad about it, which is why the personal pain number in here is the sleeper stat. Okay, you've got 44% of all voters that now say Trump's policies have hurt them personally. If you listen to me talk about what happens with voters, you know negative personal consequences are the number one way to get Trump voters to abandon Trump the man. He's extremely underwater on the Iran war. 64% of voters say the war was going to war was the wrong decision, including 73% of independents and even 21% of Republicans. You usually don't see that high a percentage of Republicans breaking with Trump, but on the Iran war, a lot of people don't like it. Less than a quarter think it is worth the costs. Democrats lead the generic ballot. Okay, so this is the ballot that basically says, who would you prefer to be in office? A generic Democrat or a generic Republican? Generic Democrat currently up 11 points over generic Republican, 50 to 39. Bottom line, Gold Standard poll says voters are deeply unhappy with Trump. And speaking of gold, he said we were going to be living through a golden age. That is not what voters are feeling. They think we're living through a gilded age where Donald Trump gets all that he wants. He gets his plane, he gets his slush fund, he gets his ballroom, he gets his arch. Voters get higher gas prices, higher grocery prices, higher healthcare prices. That's why 37%, it's low. It's bad for Donald Trump. It's not low enough. Let's get him to the Bush line.
Comments, Chris and Gary.
Sarah Longwell is a former Republican, and she does these focus groups weekly with all kinds of voters, but primarily lately she's been doing mostly Trump voters to say, is this what you bargained for? And resoundingly they say no. She summed it up very well there that, he gets a slush fund, he gets all these things, he gets all his stock trades and all that stuff, and you get higher gas prices and you get nothing from him. He admittedly says, I don't care about the people, I don't care about the economy. He cares about himself. That's all he's ever cared about.
By great coincidence, I actually listened to the podcast.
That was from?
That was from. And these are some cautionary notes. Keep in mind that when the statistic that she gave was asking the person about a generic Republican versus a generic Democrat. What does that mean? That just means, would you vote for a Republican or a Democrat? It doesn't specify who, because it can't at this stage of things. So we need to keep and the host of the podcast asked her to get into other numbers. The approval rating of the Democratic Party in that same poll, 5%. So even though the generic Democrat or Republican might give us some comfort, we have to understand that when it comes to voting time, people aren't going to be voting for generic Republican, generic Democrat. And the Democratic Party has to have a vociferously positive platform going forward. It's not enough to tell people you need to vote for the Democrat because the Democrat's not Trump. There has to be, and the other thing I've said about this is the American people don't need immediately 34 investigations from 34 different congressional committees, because they're going to look at that and say, I'm still paying high gas prices. What are you going to do to help me out of this situation that I'm in because of the Trump administration? So these numbers are good for progressives and good for the Democratic Party, but we need to remain vigilant. We need to make sure that the party has a positive platform, and people can't be complacent and say, oh, well, the numbers show that we're going to win, so I'm not even going to bother to vote. You got to vote. And you have to vote against anything that the Trump administration does to try to suppress voting.
I always compare voting to sports talk radio post-game call-ins. People call in much more when they're angry than when they're happy. And I would say the same thing about voting.
Right.
And I think there is a lot of anger out there. We've talked many times. I know, Gary, we've talked about how these are not just polls. The elections since Trump has been in office have shown Democrats outperforming double digits what they were expected. And we mentioned, Chris, last week that doesn't mean you always win. For example, there were two congressional seats in Florida that were won by Republicans, but the Democrats outperformed what had happened in November 2024 by over 10%. So that's still going to be a problem. I want to lead into that, though, into the political discussion about this Trump retribution tour, because of my three objectives, I mentioned the second one is retribution, and that is I'm going to go after any Republican who dares challenge me. And in Saturday there was a primary in Louisiana, a guy named Bill Cassidy, who these are conservatives. I'm going to talk about Tom Massey in a minute, who also lost Tuesday night. But these are people but if you dare to challenge him on anything. Now, Massey went deeper, I think, because of the Epstein issue. But let's talk about Bill Cassidy for a minute from Louisiana. He lost, and Trump. It's like he's putting these bear heads on the wall. Any comments about that primary in Louisiana?
Yeah, his big sin was he voted to convict Trump in the second impeachment.
Right.
And he was one of a handful of Republicans who did that. And Trump never forgets that stuff. So even though you vote with him 99.3% of the time, I think Cassidy did, including getting RFK Jr. through his committee. I mean, he's a doctor. Cassidy's a doctor, and he let RFK Jr. get through his committee. I mean, that was legislative malpractice, if you ask me. But yeah, I have no love lost for him, but he still has 6 or 7 months in office, and apparently he's let it be known that he's going to make the most of that, and including he's already signed on to the war resolutions power and resolution in the Senate to make them come up for a vote of whether the war should be continued. And Trump was the holdout that was preventing that from happening before. So,
well, someone like Tom Tillis in North Carolina, he didn't lose, but was walking out the door, and all of a sudden these Republicans, they seem to gain courage when it doesn't matter.
I was just going to say how much courage they obtain when it doesn't matter any longer electorally.
But there are 2 points I'd make, and one of them you made, just Gary. I think you've now got people maybe not realize that you've got a senator for another almost a year. I mean, he's going to be a senator until mid to late January of 2027. And you also then you have I have no illusions Louisiana is going to elect a Democrat, but you now have a Democrat, I don't even know who it's going to be, running against a non-incumbent, which doesn't help the Republicans. It shows once again he doesn't give a damn Trump about the party. Trump is not a Republican.
No.
He's nothing near a Republican. What he is Trump, and it's all about him, and he's taken over this party, and shame on the party for letting it to happen. I mean, I don't have any sympathy for these Republicans, but Bill Cassidy was a competent, just as John Cornyn, who's going to lose, by the way, who just got endorsed, who just lost the endorsement in Texas. But Trump does not give a damn. If you challenge him, as you said, Gary, and you've said, Chris, at all, you're done. But it doesn't help the party.
No, well, let me.
But
if I may touch on that, because when we see these news reports about Trump so-called prevailing because the candidate that he backed wins the primary, it's not really a positive thing for Trump in the big picture. To your point, the persons that he is getting rid of would be much stronger candidates against a Democrat. We have our own, the Democratic Party has its own candidates who will be running against the people that he supports in the primary and get elected. The only thing that he's done is energize his base to vote against these people, which I think Texas is a great example of it. I agree with you. John Cornyn's going to lose the primary. I'd much rather be running against Ken Paxton than John Cornyn.
And the polls show that, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why John Thune was upset, because he's got 2 incumbents in his party in the Senate who he's now going to lose. And not only the issue of incumbency, but the issue of party. So he sees Trump basically tearing down his own house. And that's why he was not happy about I know he was unhappy about what Trump did with respect to his endorsement in Texas. And I think that carried over to why he said, well, we've got some questions to ask about this slush fund.
Yeah, I mean, Thune, again, keep in mind, he's a Senate majority leader.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big deal. And by the way, if he was not, Cornyn probably would have been. Cornyn, I think,
Right.
came in second to Thune after a good buddy McConnell, after he gave away the opportunity to get rid of Trump once and for all, and he's kind of fading away.
Rick Scott was the third one that was up for that, and
Yeah.
of course nobody likes Rick Scott.
Yeah,
so.
Rick Scott, he was dreaming that he was ever going to become Senate Majority Leader. But it's unusual that Thune took to the Senate floor very critical of what Trump did, which is, again, with this cult that doesn't happen very often. So, Trump may be, doing backflips for this personal animosity retribution tour he's on. But it as a Democrat, as a progressive, I'm not unhappy about that.
Nor am I.
And let's talk a little bit about Thomas Massie, which was the other one was Saturday. Massie was Tuesday. There were quite a few primaries Tuesday. And by the way, the Texas primary, I think, is next week. So we can talk about that. I'm pretty sure that's this coming week as May comes to an end. But, Massie, he was one of the two co-sponsors along with the gentleman, the Democrat from California. I forget his name, Khan or something.
Ro Khanna.
Thank you. And so he stood up. But if you look at Massie's voting record, he is 97% in favor of Trump.
Yeah, he's very conservative, man.
But to his credit, he's taken a stand against Epstein in a very big way because he's seen this is corruption. There was some reference to Watergate in one of the earlier audios. The difference between this and Watergate, this is much more, by the way, much more corrupt than Watergate. But we had some Republicans who had the courage back then to go to Nixon in 1974 and say, you're not going to survive this. You're not.
Yeah.
These were Republicans.
It was Barry Goldwater is the one I remember. And there was one other Republican senator from Massachusetts that I recall who walked up to the White House and said, you've got to resign because you're not going to. And if you remember, I certainly do, watching the Senate Watergate hearings chaired by Sam Ervin, you had Howard Baker from Tennessee. You had Lowell Weicker from Connecticut. A couple others I know were there. They don't come to mind, but these were Republicans who were questioning the witnesses just as closely as the Democrats were.
Ed Gurney from Florida was one of the Republican senators that was on that committee.
That's correct.
Ed Gurney, that's right.
Yeah.
Haven't heard that
right.
name in a while.
Yeah.
And Sam Ervin, who chaired the committee from North Carolina, he may have been a Democrat, but he was
a Democrat.
But he was no liberal.
No.
So back on Massie, that's not going to affect Congress in the sense that's a Republican seat. I don't think any Democrat's going to win that. But now you've got a legislator who has almost a year to do what his conscience tells him to do.
Right.
If you think he's going to back down off Epstein from what just happened, I got some swampland in New Jersey, Chris, I was going to sell you last week. So
that is the most expensive congressional race primary that there's ever been in the history of the country, which, doesn't speak well for us going forward, if this is what we're doing. But when you look at these primaries, they are the only people that vote in primaries are the true believers, the Kool-Aid drinkers. I mean, they are, when we talk about poll watch every week and the poll numbers are slipping with independents and others, not with his base. His base is very, very, they're going to be there, hoping that they get some money from this slush fund probably, but they are not going anywhere. And they vote in these primaries, but that's not what happens in a general election.
Right.
And
exactly.
And when you look at these poll numbers that are out there in terms of the way the rest of the world feels about what's going on, it's going to be a whole different game. So I think he's really hurting himself by going as hard as he is for his, got to be loyal to me. That's the only litmus test. And he's picking some people that are not going to play well in November.
Let me take issue with one word you just used. He's not hurting himself. He's hurting his party, about which he cares nothing. Quibbling with the wordage.
No,
but
it's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah.
Well, let me make 2 points, Your Honors, as counsel. The judges want it, us to be lawyers to be specific. 2 points. and they're consistent, Gary, with what you said. One is, and Gary and Chris, you made the same point. What's happening with this retribution tour is and it's certainly the case in Louisiana, and will be the case in Texas in the Senate races, is you're going with a candidate who's got a tougher job to beat the Democrat.
Right.
You're doing Democrats a favor by. I mean, I'm happy to see Paxton. He's a criminal.
No, he's awful.
He was indicted by the Republican state, legislature, should have been convicted, except for the games being played in Texas, which is a very much a Republican state. Secondarily, though, just like you mentioned, John Thune is bothered by the fact you're taking away one of my soldiers when I've got a small majority anyway. Mike Johnson, who's nothing more than a Trump, I don't know, toady, has the same problem. Though you take Massey, who's now pissed off, who's been now given the like Tom Tillis, the ability to actually maybe think independently and have some courage because he's got no more future. But again, in the House, you've got a slim 4 or 5 difference between Democrats and Republicans. So you've given Mike Johnson a problem too,
right,
with Massey.
Yeah.
So you're not, as you said, you're not helping the party.
Not at all.
So I don't. When Trump is high-fiving and I'm sure drinking champagne, thinking, what power base I have, as a Democrat, I'm not bothered by what's happening here because it's helping Democrats.
In the end, it definitely will help the Democrats. There's no question.
It's just like we mentioned last week in Georgia in 2020, when you had 2 runoffs and 2 Democrats came out of that. When you had the runoff in January of 2021, you literally had Trump saying, don't go vote because it's all rigged. I mean, Trump caused those 2 Democrats to become, in Georgia, the senators of a very red state. I mean, the thought that Georgia would have 2 Democrats, and then what happened too? I think they thought, once we'll get them out. That hasn't happened and won't happen. I don't see many people thinking that Ossoff is going to lose, and Reverend Warnock won 2 years ago. So. He's his own worst enemy. So I hope you feel good, Trump, about what you've got this power control over the party, but it's killing the party if you end up losing both majorities, which I think there's a very good chance of you doing in November. So,
but let's be clear about this.
Sure.
We ascribe to Trump the same characteristics that we do to other politicians, other elected officials, which is that there is a minimum level of critical thinking and analysis of whatever facts, opinions, before he undertakes an action. He's not doing that. There is nothing like the thought process that we're used to. He's simply, as I said last week, he doesn't have policies, he has whims. And he acts on those whims regardless of the impact on his party. All he cares about is what whim does he have, and how is he going to pursue satisfying that?
And the world be damned.
And his own party be damned.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah, the Georgia also had a primary for Secretary of State this week.
Oh,
And guess who finished 3rd of the 3 candidates? Brad Raffensperger, the one who stood up and said there was no fraud in the election in Georgia. And that just shows you how these people that vote in primaries are the hardest core of the hardcore, and they believe it, and they believe to this day when Trump tells them that the election was stolen, and they blame Raffensperger for not overturning it, not finding the
13,000 votes. Yeah,
that was a criminal act. He was indicted for that.
Yeah,
He being Trump
was.
Yes, Trump was. I mean, that phone call, he's big on these perfect phone calls.
Call.
The perfect call to the Ukrainian president. Basically, he was, telling them, you better do this or else I'm going to not, we're going to blackmail you. We're not going to fund, give you the defense funds. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Gary, that he has this 30-some% that would tell you the world's flat. Problem they've got with that's not enough to win you a general election in November.
How sad is it that they punished the guy who actually stood up for the rule of law? I mean, that's what our country's become. Happy to look the other way, because it starts at the top. The fish rots from the head, So
Yep.
Well, but that's exactly what happened with Bill Cassidy and Thomas Massey. I mean, the same thing. They were being punished for following the rule of law.
Yeah.
So there's a consistent pattern here.
Yep.
And well, listen, why don't we take our final break? I want to get a little lighter. I do want to talk about after the break of Ted Turner, who I think is worth mentioning for a couple of minutes. And we have a little audio from Ted talking to one of the late night hosts. So you're listening to the Voice of Reason, and we'll be back in a few minutes after a word from some of our sponsors or other shows.
Hey everyone, it is Brandy Joy with the Brandy Joy Joyride. Feel free to hop in and have a good time with us every Thursday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. This show is brought to you by One Unit, dedicated to bringing people together, letting your voices be heard, and of course we're here to entertain you, upbuild you, inspire you, and even hear from you. So every Thursday, tune in to 106.1 FM, Brandy Joy Joyride, and we will hear from you and let's have some fun.
You're listening to the Voice of Reason on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Tune in Fridays at 11 a.m. for the Brand Builders Radio Show, brought to you by Professional Systems Printing and Promotions. They'll talk about everything from printing your business cards to brochures and banners. Hey, they'll put your name and logo on just about anything. So let's build something together. That's the Brand Builders Radio Show, Fridays from 11 a.m. to noon, here on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
Area,
Yeah.
And Trump is, he lives in that gray area. They double down on everything. Everything you've ever seen, he takes advantage of. And when he finally got his tax return leaked, it showed he paid $700 or something. Yeah.
Think about it. There were 40,000
millions
people.
of dollars of income.
But think about it. There were 40,000 people that were subject to that leak, and one filed a lawsuit. The other one, your cousin asked for an apology and got an apology.
My cousin.
I mean, his last name was Griffin.
Oh, okay.
That was just
as a part of the family I'm not aware of.
I heard that last night. I said the way I
missed that
I
part.
remember that name because it was your dad. It was his last name. But I mean, the guy went to prison. I mean, the guy I think is in prison currently. The guy who and the IRS guy. Yeah.
And he, anyway, we're going back on.
Yeah.
Whoops.
All right, we're back on, and I want to talk a little bit about a little lighter note because I agree with you, Chris. I don't want our listeners or viewers to, walk away, put a gun to their head or jump off a bridge, because I think there is optimism. But one of the things that happened the last couple of weeks, Ted Turner passed away, and my parents lived in Atlanta, so I was already in law school and then moving on with my career, but I spent a lot of time in Atlanta. So I talked to my father a lot about Ted Turner, who was from Atlanta. And, it's been a while now, but what he did pretty much was amazing. I don't know what, his father committed suicide. But I would urge our listeners to go to YouTube and the internet. And he had a billboard company, and he went to Atlanta. He didn't have a lot of money. He wasn't like, he had some money, but it wasn't a lot of money. And he had this concept of a couple things. One, turning a local, this Channel 17 in Atlanta into a superstation. And the concept of satellites, which now is assumed, so you have satellite radio, but at the time it wasn't. And so there were two things that he did. He turned this superstation became a big deal, and was funny about that, which I want to share a couple things about Ted Turner, so we don't all just walk out here, angry. It was funny. He realized you could make money. He made money running Andy Griffin and Leave It to Beaver. Griffith, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But they told him that he had to run news for 30 minutes. So he'd run the news literally at 3:30 a.m. Mm-hmm. Because he wasn't making money off the news. He was making money off, running Andy Griffith and Leave It to Beaver and Green Acres and the Beverly Hillbillies. But and then the second thing that he became famous for was the concept of 24-hour news, which started in 1980, by the way. And there's, again, you can go, I would urge our listeners, there's a huge benefit we have now, which I hope we all appreciate, of going to the internet, going to YouTube, and you can see these discussions, and you can see interviews. There was a 60 Minutes on him where they talked to these various news people, and he wasn't a news person himself, but he the concept of 24/7 news has that's become a given now. Now you have 24/7 sports. Those were not things that you had in 1980, which now is over 40 years ago.
And that began with CNN, which was his creature.
And then he bought the Atlanta Braves and the Atlanta Hawks. I do want to mention again, just to be light for a minute, and I don't know if you, Gary, how much you follow baseball, but he decided he was going to manage the Atlanta Braves. They used to be a very bad baseball team before. And by the way, Bobby Cox, who was the manager, died as well. But he decided he was going to manage the team for one day. And he knew nothing about baseball at all. He just wanted, to have the team, as I say, the Hawks as well. So if you go back, there's a picture of him in the dugout being a manager. And there was a player on the Braves who was the current manager. I forget who it was at that year, but said, "I've been told to take a 2-week break." And so he's managing the team, and the commissioner of baseball, Bowie Kuhn, was not at all happy about this. And he told him in no uncertain terms, "Get the hell out of the dugout. You're not managing this team."
Right.
And he thought, Turner said, "Well, look, I own the team. I can do whatever the hell I want to do." And he was told promptly by the commissioner and the National League president, I think it was Cronin at the time, perhaps, or one of the presidents, said, so he was, after a day, he was told to get the hell out of the dugout. So,
but go ahead. On a personal point, when it was the Superstation, going to school in Tallahassee at the Harvard of the South, I remember sitting in the dorm the night that Hank Aaron broke the home run record, and the only reason we could see it was because we had 4 television stations: ABC, CBS, NBC, and Turner's Superstation, and they broadcast all of the Braves games. So again, I think it was the spring of 1974 or 75 that we all watched Hank Aaron on the Superstation hit that home run.
Well, there's a story. He did not have a lot of money, and I won't get into too many stories, but I just again was very interested in his life story. But this is a true story. You won't believe this, but he apparently went up to get to the money people. It was probably a law office in New York somewhere, and he literally got on his hands and knees like a dog, and he said, "Whose boots do I need to lick to get money?" And literally was on his hands and knees. And this is not, I'm not making this up, because he was desperate. And he ultimately, became, Time Warner took over CNN, but he was being interviewed by David Letterman. I think he was 70 years old. I do want to just give our listeners a taste of.
Don't make that Turner. Sound old.
That's true. I thought about that when I saw that. But this is Ted Turner and David Letterman.
Love to. This is you when you were involved with the Atlanta Braves. What happened here, Ted?
Well, we had a contest. We were promoting. We had a lousy team, and we were trying to come up, me and the promotion department, with different ideas to get the attendance up. And we decided to have a little contest with the Phillies. The Phillies were in town, and they had little things, the games to play before the game started. And they couldn't find anybody to do the nose trick, to push the nose to the baseball from first base to home plate before Tug McGraw of the Phillies pushed his baseball to home plate from on the third base line. And I was doing real well pushing the ball with my nose, but it wasn't going fast enough. So I started hitting it with my forehead, and the damn ball rolled off the grass into the what do you call it? The base path. Yeah. And it was gravel. And I had to hit the ball with my head because I wanted to win. I wanted to show my players and the 30,000 fans that were in the stands that the owner wasn't afraid to get a little dirt on him. And so I started pushing the ball in the gravel, and I ended up scraping my face up pretty bad. But I won by 6 feet.
Yeah, there's a picture of Ted Turner with his nose all scraped up. Can you picture the owner? He's pushing this ball from first base to home, and Tug McGraw, the Phillies, is doing the same thing from third base.
I'm surprised Tug McGraw would do that, but that's a whole other.
Yeah, and he was Captain America. He won. He was the what do you call it? America's Cup.
That's right.
Yep,
That's
he won
right. Yeah.
America's
And
Cup.
when he found out that Jane Fonda was getting divorced from the who was the gentleman in California, she was married
Tom
to.
Hayden.
Tom Hayden. He that wasn't just some random meeting. He said, I want to get Jane Fonda's phone number, and he was married to Jane Fonda for many years. And they even they stayed amicable. I mean, she said she has some very nice kind comments. All right, we do have a call. Steve, how are you doing today?
Well, Kevin, how are you all doing?
Good. You remember Ted Turner, by the way? We were chatting about Ted Turner. Do you remember him from Atlanta?
When I was running the board, I think I told you the other day, when I was running the overnight board at WNSI over there in St. Pete, we ran CNN as filler. So all I remember is the lady saying, "Hi, you're in tune with the world. This is Sasha Flu." Whatever happened to her?
Well, what's on your mind?
Well, I'm trying to stay optimistic. I'm 73. It's been a rocky ride. I tend to sometimes feel almost like I want to give up with the oligarchs trying to take over, but I'm trying to stay in there.
There are more of us than there are of them, so keep that in mind.
And Steve, don't give up. Those of us who are in your age cohort, I'm right behind you. We've lived through times that tell us that what's happening now shouldn't be happening. So please don't give up.
Thank you for calling. I want to have a great weekend, Steve. I wanted to go back a minute. I should have run this earlier on Thomas Massey. Chris Cuomo, who some of you may know was on CNN, is now on a different network and also on satellite radio, had some fairly strong words about what happened with Thomas Massey.
Here's a breaking news head check for you. You don't have to like Thomas Massey's politics. You don't have to like Thomas Massey. But Donald Trump, who barely got into Fordham University, and then his daddy got him into Wharton Business School, where he underperformed, calling this guy uneducated and stupid. He went to MIT. He's got an electrical engineering degree and a master's. Okay? The guy's not stupid, certainly not compared to the president. All right? But just be very clear. Why does he hate Massey? Because Massey was against a tax cut that wasn't paid for. Because Massey was in favor of releasing the Epstein files. That's what this is about. Fealty to Trump. Not Massey being a rhino. He's more conservative than Trump has ever been in his life. He's more conservative than everyone around Trump has ever been in their life. He's actually the real MAGA, like it or not. That's what he was about. And now the most money ever. Oh, by the way, those are Trump's allies. The PAC money guys that he was supposed to take out of this. Remember, they can't buy me. More money ever spent in politics than ever before on his watch. This primary is the most money ever. And Thomas Massey, look, you can like him, you cannot like him. I don't like that he didn't release the names that he said he got on the Epstein files of the people who need to be held to account. I don't like that. I criticized him about it many times. But the idea that he's dumb, no. That he's not a conservative, no. And the guy who's running against him is a chooch, and everybody knows it. You have become what you said you opposed, if you're okay with this.
Let me move on. I just wanted to make that point, but there's one other topic I want to talk about that I think is a big deal. There's something called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, and there's been quite a few complaints about the Electoral College. We've had, I think, something incredible. It's just in this century, we've had two elections where the Democrat won the popular vote in 2000 with Al Gore, which we in Florida certainly know about, and then in 2016 with our good friend Trump, Hillary Clinton. Trump seems to never realize this, but he lost the popular vote not only in 2020 but in 2016
by 5 million against Hillary.
Yes, and but there's something, and I've got a little audio on this about a compact, but I thought it was kind of going nowhere. But the states have the ability, and I know, Gary, you're aware of this too, that in the Constitution, how the states run their elections is up to the state. And Virginia was the latest state just 2 weeks ago to enact this, to become part of this interstate compact. It's called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. And it puts the number up to 222 of electoral votes. And again, you only need 270. And what those states have committed to do is to follow the popular vote. So if you're in Virginia, for example, which is not a small state, there's some decent, it's not Florida or California, but they have some decent amount of electoral votes in Virginia. You'd be committing to put all of those electoral votes for the winner of the national popular vote. So it's a big deal. And so you need 270, you're at 222, you need whatever the math is, what's that, 38 or what, I don't know, whatever the math is. But there's pending legislation in 4 or 5 states now, Arizona and others, to get to 270. So I just wanted our listeners to be aware that this is just not some pipe dream about, there's no mandate that we have to follow the procedure we currently have. So I wanted to have our listeners hear something about this concept.
Something big happened in Virginia last month that you probably missed. On April 13th, Governor Abigail Spanberger signed a bill making Virginia the 18th state to join the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. That's an agreement among states who elect the president by the popular vote rather than the Electoral College. The compact goes into effect when enough states sign on to it to reach 270 electoral votes, the number needed to elect the president. With Virginia's support, states in the compact now have 222 electoral votes, and the results of the midterms could push the popular vote effort over the top. If Democrats take control of state governments in some combination of Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Nevada, and legislatures in those states adopt the compact, that could push the effort over 270 electoral votes. That means there's actually a chance the president could be elected by the popular vote in 2028. Here's why that matters. The Electoral College is fundamentally undemocratic. Why? It violates basic notions of one person, one vote by allowing the loser of the popular vote to win the presidency. It disenfranchises 80% of Americans by allowing a small number of swing states to decide the presidency. It dates back to a time when slave states wanted to preserve their power over free states. And it incentivizes election rigging. Joe Biden won the popular vote by 7 million votes in 2020. But Donald Trump lost the 3 closest states in the Electoral College by just 44,000 combined votes. Donald Trump never could have attempted to overturn the election, and there would have been no insurrection if the U.S. had a system in which every vote counted equally in presidential elections. That's why you should pay attention to the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. And it's another reason why this year's midterm elections will be so consequential. For more reporting on voting rights in the midterms, go to motherjones.com.
I want to get both your comments on that, but I want to just make a point that supports what this concern is. In the last election, 92% of the campaign activity occurred in 7 swing states. So for most of the country, they didn't give a damn about you in Florida,
right,
or California,
because they knew which way it was going to go.
Yeah, the elections became Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and there were literally 7. So this election for president became an election in 7 states. So everyone is entitled to have their opinion. My hope is at least it's an informed opinion when you get educated about that. But I wanted both of your thoughts about this.
Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, I think it's sad that we don't have, the popular vote determine who the president is, and the inability to get a constitutional amendment passed to change that in the Constitution so that the Electoral College was abolished would be impossible to obtain today. But I think this is a wonderful idea because it really, I think when you look at the polls and most Americans, a huge majority of Americans think that my vote doesn't count if I don't live in one of those 7 swing states. And that shouldn't be the case. We should all have a voice in this. And I hope we get enough states to sign on to it.
It'd be great. And Kevin, I've said more than once that can you imagine if matters were reversed in 2016? That is to say, because we know Hillary won the popular vote, lost the electoral vote. What if it had been the other way around? Do you think Trump supporters would have abided by the result if he had won the popular and lost the electoral. So it's always a matter of whose ox is being gored.
Well, given they did not abide when he lost them both in 2020, I think we know the answer.
Good point. Excellent point. Yeah. And by the way, just for the benefit of the viewers or listeners, I'm sorry, I'd never heard the term chooch by Cuomo. It is an Italian-American slang term typically derived from the Sicilian word cicciui, meaning a small donkey or simpleton. So tuck that one away.
Yeah, Chris Cuomo, we can always look for some colorful language. I don't think in my lifetime, and we're close to the same ages, that it happened before, where someone had lost the popular election and won the electoral college. And given it's twice happened in just this century, and even with Gore, there was, I think, a strong perception that in Florida, which became the centerpiece, that more people intended to go vote for Gore. I think the butterfly ballot issue in Palm Beach, to me, was a huge problem. But I think the concept, one, of the person who gets the most votes should win, and secondarily, the point we've just talked about, which is what it's created, the fact that we neglect, most of the country in these elections, and all of a sudden 7 states become the universe.
Right.
That's a rather logical thought process, I would think.
Well, and let's just be very clear about this. To understand what the Electoral College as it's presently administered means, you're a voter in Florida, whatever presidential election there is, candidate A gets, let's say, 1,000,001 votes. Candidate B gets 990,999 votes. Candidate A gets all of our electoral votes. And that's why it violates the principle of, I think it's Baker versus Carr in the Supreme Court, one person, one vote. And it's tragic to think that those votes don't count just because of the Electoral College.
Gary, any thoughts?
No, I would love to see it happen, because I think it's long overdue.
Well, I think we all, I think, are fairly above average in our knowledge of politics, as we just enjoy talking about it in this nightmare. But that we name the states, there is pending legislation in those states that were noted. And again, I would urge our listeners to go to the internet and so to the extent you care about it, although it's not Florida, you're not going to see Florida do this, because it's perceived as a pro-democratic action, which really it should not be meant. It's not meant to be that.
With both a capital D and a lowercase d.
Absolutely. But with Trump and with DeSantis, you don't do anything that even sniffs of any, losing the ability to keep the Republican. And again, I'm not sure why this has to be a partisan issue, Gary, that like we talked about last week, Chris, about having a free and fair election. You mentioned that being a fundamental concept. Why is that debatable? Should we be debating the fact that the person who gets the most votes should win the election? I don't understand why these are debatable.
Yeah, well, a lot of our system favors minority rule. And look at the Senate, for example. All of these red states, they get 2 senators, as does California. And California has, multiple times the number of people living there that live in Wyoming, for example, and yet they both have 2 senators. So I looked at a map this week of, you see the red states and blue states map. And when you see it that way, there's all this red in them. It looks like the country is mostly, Republican and red. And then they said, well, let's do that same map with just the population of where the people actually live, and take out all the national park lands and all these things in the middle of the states that people fly over, but nobody lives there. And it's predominantly blue. So, but yet, look, we're evenly divided in the legislatures and all of these things because of what we've created, and it really does promote minority rule, sadly.
Well, along with gerrymandering.
Yeah.
I mean, that's been the real problem over the last 30, 40 years.
Well, it's been made clear that the Republican strategy, or at least the MAGA strategy, has been minority rule because the whites are no longer going to be the majority of people in this country in many years.
Right.
So the way they did that, they weren't stupid at all. They knew minority rule required them to control the judges. So you have Supreme Court making rulings that the vast majority of people do not agree with. For example, eviscerating Roe v. Wade. Over 70% of this country disagrees with that.
Right.
The majority of this country does not agree with redistricting and gerrymandering.
Right.
So it is exactly that minority rule. For just a couple minutes, there's some miscellaneous thoughts I had. I don't know if you bought a Trump phone lately, but if you did, you may not be. I would not wait by the door anytime soon. But anyone want to talk about that grift that's come
We're
up?
supposed to be made in America.
Yeah.
And now they're made with American values.
With American values. And they changed, I was looking into this morning, they changed the rules on these transactions that, people thought that they deposited $100 towards the purchase of a phone.
Right.
Not so fast there. What they purchased was an opportunity to purchase the phone if and when it's actually built. So talk about grift.
You know how much money that was made by that? I mean, it was not a small amount of money. I don't know if you know, it was millions of dollars.
It was, gosh, I wrote it down. Give me a second. But I think it was many tens of millions of dollars.
And the interesting part about that, to me anyway, which I didn't even know about, was that he's pissing off people that like Trump.
Right.
He's grifting. He's happy to grift his own. He'll eat his own, as they say.
Yeah.
But like you said, they changed it. No, you were giving you the right. It's kind of like some of these, when you get a season ticket for this sports, now they're saying, well, you've got to pay a license fee to have the right to get a season ticket.
Or in this instance, it's if we build a stadium and have a team.
Correct. That's true.
In this instance, it's you have a right to buy the phone if we create it, which they have no ability to do at this point.
You could have a whole show on Trump Stakes and Trump University and all the things. I don't know why anybody would consider buying anything with Trump's name on it. But I got it. I do think there's some justice, and the people getting screwed are Trump supporters a little bit, that maybe they should have been aware that this guy, I wouldn't trust him 5 feet.
Well said.
But I'll give you the right to buy a phone. You've got to give me $100 to give me the concept of getting a phone. That's just
built, as Gary said, not necessarily any longer built in America, but built with American values.
Yeah, and I wonder if there's a warranty on that phone, and who's going to honor it.
Yeah, I don't know who would do the service on that. I wouldn't be real confident about that either. So, well, we've got just a few minutes. I always want to talk about Epstein. I guess the biggest issue with Epstein this week was just the fact that Massey was taken out, that he dared to challenge what happened. And again, keep in mind, and I'm not going to let this go, and our show has it, half of the documents have not been produced.
That's right.
And there's not been compliance with that federal statute. And I do think that would change if there's a change in the who's in charge in Congress, in the House or Senate. But a Republican should be concerned about that this statute is not being complied with.
Just straight up. I mean, statute is clear. Release the documents. They've released less than half.
And the other thing that people don't realize, it also imposes an obligation on the Attorney General to be giving reporting which they're not. Bondi did not, and God knows Todd Blanche won't touch this with a 10-foot pole. But the statute, if you read it, which is a fairly clear, it's about a 10 or 11 page statute. We've talked about it, Gary. We've read from it when it came out back in December of 2025. But the Attorney General had to give reasons why. It's kind of like a privilege log concept in law, why you're not producing certain documents. And it's just not happening.
Yep. They just, nope, we decide not to do it. And let me say one other thing. And I always think about this in terms of, my God, can you imagine if Biden or Obama had done this? Todd Blanche at the time was first assistant to Pam Bondi.
Right.
And this controversy starts arising. Todd Blanche goes to a federal prison to privately interview the principal witness in the case, besides the victims, Ghislaine Maxwell. And immediately after that, she's transferred to a minimum security prison. which is completely inappropriate for sex offenders. We come full circle now to how we're outraged by what this administration does.
Correct. And I want to back up a little bit. Our good friend Mike Johnson on this, just back on this issue of this insider trading. Did you see his comments this week about that?
Oh yeah.
Well, let me guess. He said, "I don't know anything about it."
It's worse. It's worse.
That's what he always says.
It was even worse. He said, Congress people don't make a lot of money. They make $175,000, and they haven't had an increase in forever. And never mind the pension and health benefits. But he was suggesting that it was okay to violate the insider trading statutes because poor Congress people don't make enough money.
Can't live on the 174.
And I don't know whether is there a straight face concept sometimes you need to have that maybe does.
A friend of mine called, remember Mr. Magoo back in the 60s? It was a cartoon of a guy who was blind and couldn't hear very well. And that's what my friend calls Mike Johnson, Mike Magoo, because every time he's asked something, he goes, "Oh, I hadn't seen that," or "I haven't heard that," and it's remarkable.
It's just laughable, Mike Johnson. I mean, at least John Thune, I think, has some integrity. Mike Johnson, who will not be speaker, by the way, after a few months. But the quote of the week, which I think applies with this horrible administration. The greatness of a nation is measured by how it treats the least among us. And I think we need to remind ourselves that from time to time when we see what's happening with this administration. Join us again next Thursday at 9 o'clock for another edition of The Voice of Reason. I'd like to thank my co-host, Gary Gibbons and Chris Griffin. It was great to have you on board. I'm Kevin Carey, reminding you, if statement from a conservative seems a little too implausible to be true, don't believe that just because a conservative said it. Make them prove it.